Greetings, junior researchers, and welcome to Site Mall W. I'm Dr. Damian Wolf. Now, over my last 15 years here, I've untangled the metaphysical webs of, well, dozens of anomalies. It's kind of trivial when your IQ is sitting comfortably north of 186, but hey, we all have our hobbies. Today, though, my goal is refreshingly simple. I am just here to keep you alive. You've been assigned to one of the most deceptively dangerous entities we have in custody. In this orientation explainer, we're going to cover the absolute non-negotiable protocols you need to survive your rotation. Your diligence, your attention to detail, and your psychological fortitude are absolutely going to be tested. So, let's begin.
Okay, let's dive into this. We have a lot to cover today to ensure you walk out of here in one piece. We'll start with a welcome to the site, look at the very real threat of Compound X, run through the mandatory hazmat stuff, talk about exposure and withdrawal, and then wrap up with a little case study.
So starting off with Section 1. Welcome to Site-16. You are now officially assigned to the containment of SCP-230. And looking at him, you might actually wonder why we have such insanely strict security. I mean, he looks like a perfectly normal, gaunt Caucasian guy in his early 30s, maybe 6'1". He's incredibly friendly, he loves bright clothing, especially pink and yellow, and honestly, the guy just seems literally incapable of feeling any negative emotions whatsoever.
In fact, if you ask him to describe himself, he will repeatedly tell you that he is, quote, the gayest man alive. Now, based on my own psychological evaluations, I can tell you this preoccupation with the word gay has absolutely nothing to do with sexual orientation. He actually has zero interest in sex. Instead, he's using the word in the most traditional sense to describe his state of pure, unadulterated gaiety. He is perpetually cheerful, but you really need to profoundly understand that this bright, sunny disposition, it masks a highly lethal biological payload.
That brings us to Section 2, the threat of Compound X. This is the grim biochemical reality of the anomaly, and honestly, it's the true source of his Euclid classification. You see, the danger isn't in what SCP-230 does, it's literally just in his biological existence.
SCP-230 secretes a chemical from his pores that is molecularly very similar to heroin. We designate this compound -XXX. But here is the truly terrifying part. The second it gets secreted, it evaporates immediately, instantly contaminating the air around him. It acts as an aerosolized narcotic, and it is brutally efficient. We're talking effective in gaseous form and as little as 30 parts per million. If you breathe it in, it forces your brain into a state of extreme euphoria, rendering you perfectly compliant and utterly addicted almost instantly. When we first recovered SCP-230, he had 20 people acting as his willing servants in an apartment, several of whom were actually dead because they literally forgot to perform basic life functions. When we asked him about the bodies, he just cheerfully noted that things were getting a bit crowded, so he asked a few of them to stop breathing.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why his victims are so compliant. Take a look at the massive spike on the right for Class D personnel exposed to Compound -100. That dopamine hit is staggering. It registers at greater than 5 times the dopamine release you would expect during sexual climax. The human brain is simply not equipped to handle that level of chemical reward. Anyone exposed becomes instantly addicted and will literally comply with any request SCP-230 makes, just as long as it allows them to stay in his presence. It is total subjugation through chemical euphoria.
Which naturally brings us to Section 3, Mandatory Hazmat and Containment Protocols. Because this threat is invisible and airborne, your survival relies entirely on your strict adherence to these practical safety guides.
First, let's look at the containment chamber's engineering. SCP-230's room features a heavily controlled, highly isolated ventilation system. Any air leaving that room has to be routed through a dedicated, strict filtration matrix before it's allowed to even think about merging back into the facility's regular air supply. If this filtration system were to fail, Compound MYYY would be pumped throughout Site MYY, resulting in a catastrophic, site-wide euphoric breach. Monitoring these filters is an absolute top priority for us.
Now, for those of you whose duties mean you actually have to physically enter the chamber, here are your absolute directives. 1. Verify the auto-locking door mechanism. The door locks automatically every time it closes, and it can only be opened from the outside. 2. You must don a full-body hazmat suit. 3. You need to engage a completely independent oxygen supply. You cannot breathe the air in that room under any circumstances. And 4. Absolutely no physical contact with SCP-230. Ever.
But what happens if something goes wrong? Section 4 covers exposure, withdrawal, and clearance.
Let's outline the severe medical procedures and the brutal realities you'll face if a suit tears or an oxygen seal fails.
If you are exposed to compound NMD, you will be immediately detained and thrown into medical isolation. Because the compound creates instantaneous addiction, taking you away from SCP-230 triggers extreme withdrawal, and the physical signs are just horrific. Over a typical 2-week period, you'll endure severe tremors, sheer panic, violent vomiting, and diarrhea. As your nervous system just totally collapses, symptoms can escalate to dementia, insanity, temporary or permanent blindness, and internal hemorrhaging. It is an agonizing, mind-breaking 2 weeks.
And, that's assuming you survive. The mortality risks are terrifying. For those of you exposed merely to the gaseous form in the air, the withdrawal process carries a 30% mortality rate. But listen to me carefully. Compound X is present in all of the subject's bodily fluids: sweat, saliva, blood. If you make physical contact with the skin, or worse, ingest any bodily fluid, the mortality rate during withdrawal is a clinical, unyielding 100%. Physical contact is certain death.
Now let's suppose you fall into the 70% that actually survives gaseous withdrawal. You are still not out of the woods. Exposed personnel have to undergo a strict minimum of 1 month of medical observation. If, after that month, you're cleared by our medical staff, you get a mandatory transfer to another facility and are strictly forbidden from ever having contact with SCP-230 again. However, if after that month you're still exhibiting symptoms or psychological dependencies, you will face immediate administrative termination. We simply cannot risk compromised personnel.
Which leads perfectly into Section 5, Case Study, Addendum 230-1. To demonstrate exactly why we have these termination protocols in place, we're going to review a real-world Foundation case. This right here is what happens when containment and recovery fail.
Let's move to this timeline and see how this builds. This is the tragic case of researcher Ma. She was a Class 2 personnel who suffered accidental exposure to the compound. She was detained, miraculously survived the agonizing withdrawal, and after a month of observation, medical staff believed she was clean. So she was cleared and released, but the psychological hook of that massive dopamine spike, it just remained dormant. 2 months later, she was found actively attempting to break into SCP-230's containment area from the outside. When confronted, she reacted with extreme violence, injuring several personnel in a desperate bid to just get back to the anomaly. She was detained, examined, and subsequently terminated.
Because of that violent breach, new precautions were implemented. Any subject who has been exposed and supposedly cleared must now undergo mandatory, regular psychological exams. We're specifically looking for behavioral traits outlined in Document 230-4436-B. As junior researchers, you're now our first line of defense. You have to constantly monitor yourselves and your peers. If you see a colleague displaying uncharacteristic irritability, an obsession with the containment wing, or any signs of latent addiction, you must report it immediately. Failure to do so puts the entire site at risk.
SCP-230 is going to greet you with a smile. He'll be friendly, conversational, and seem utterly harmless in his demeanor. But make no mistake, his very biology is a weapon that will strip away your free will and your life if you give it a fraction of a chance. So I'll leave you with this final thought to carry into the field. Check your seals, watch your colleagues, and ask yourself, are you showing signs of Document 230-4436-B, or will you be vigilant enough to survive your rotation? I have high hopes for you. Mostly. Welcome to Site-X, Team. Dismissed.